distinguished members of the Norwegian Nobel Committee, and friends from around the world, thank you. As you said in your announcement, we do combat hunger. We do improve conditions for peace in conflict-affected areas. And most of all, we are a driving force in efforts to prevent the use of hunger as a weapon of war and conflict. Well, that's the World Food Program, saving lives and changing lives. Working, assisting over 115 million people in 80 countries day in and day out, the women and the men of WFP, we've gained, as you can imagine, quite a unique perspective. We've learned that there is great richness in those who are seen in the world as the poor. And many of us who are considered rich, well, we are actually poor in the things that matter most. Division is the greatest problem. It is known by many names: brokenness, polarization, alienization, discrimination, hatred, war. And today, division's most stark expression right now is the divide between the wealth, for example, of billionaires who've earned an additional $1.8 trillion during the pandemic, and the hundreds of millions of people who go to bed hungry every night. Allow me to break down the facts of hunger as they stand right now. 811 million people go to bed chronically hungry every single night around the planet. 283 million people are in a hunger crisis. In other words, they're marching towards starvation. And within that, 45 million within 43 countries across the globe are in a hunger emergency. In other words, famine is knocking on their door. Places like Afghanistan, Madagascar, Myanmar, Guatemala, Ethiopia, Sudan, South Sudan, Mozambique, Niger, Syria, Mali, Burkina Faso, Somalia, Haiti, and I can go on and on. The world has often experienced famine, but when has it ever been so widespread in so many places at the same time? And why? 3 reasons. First, man-made conflict. Dozens of civil wars and regional conflicts are raging, and hunger has been weaponized to achieve military and political objectives. Second, climate shocks, climate change. Floods, droughts, locusts, and rapidly changing weather patterns have created severe crop failures around the world. Third, COVID-19. The viral pandemic has created a secondary hunger pandemic, which is far worse than the first. Shutdowns have destroyed livelihoods. Shutdowns stopped the movement of food and inflated prices, and the net result is the poor are priced out of survival. The ripple effect of COVID has been devastating on the global economy. During the pandemic, $3.7 trillion of lost income, mostly among the poor of the poor, have been wiped out, while food prices at the same time are rising. The cost of shipping, for example, has risen 300% to 400%. But in places of conflict and low-income countries, it's even worse. For example, in Aleppo, Syria, a war zone that I just returned from, food is now 7 times more expensive than it was just 2 years ago. And even then, they had no money. Can you just imagine how a mother weeps over her children? The combined effect of these 3, conflict, climate, COVID, has created an unprecedented perfect storm. Well, what do we do about it? The first thing we need to do is restore our moral compass. The highest standard of humanity has always been the golden rule. It's a part of all religions, all cultures, and it is the foundation of the culture of the World Food Program every single day. I learned it growing up, like many of you as a child, as articulated by Jesus of Nazareth, who said, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you," or "Love your neighbor as yourself." I've learned that a more accurate way to translate this from the ancient Hebrew is, "Love your neighbor as your equal." Imagine seeing my neighbor as my equal. It changes everything. If I love my neighbor as my equal, discrimination, racism, sexism, and every other ism disappears. And to my way of thinking, we are equals because we're all created in the image of God. Each and every one of us is very special, and yet we are equals. Regardless of our religious views or our views on creation, we can all agree on the practical significance of every single person being equal, and most importantly, being treated equally. It had been a very long day in the rubble of war-stricken Yemen, seeing the suffering, the tragedy, the horror of war. And we went to a children's hospital. And as I was walking from room to room, the devastation, one of the particular rooms, the little girl's feet were sticking out of the blanket. And I have 2 daughters, and you can imagine, as I thought when they were little, I'm going to walk over there and I'm going to tickle her little feet. She didn't giggle. She didn't smile. She didn't even move. She just stared with empty eyes. It was like tickling a ghost. I went out of the room, slid around the corner, and I wept. Too late. We got there too late. Our failure to see this little girl as our neighbor, our sister, our equal, has created all the consequences of her tragic life: war, starvation, and those empty eyes. On her behalf, I must express the urgency of this particular hour, the global threat of famine for millions and millions of our brothers, our sisters, our neighbors, our equals. You heard this fact from me earlier: 45 million people in 43 countries knocking on famine's door, and it is within our power to save every single one of them. They are already desperately hungry, and they are just one weather system, one military maneuver, one price spike, or one supply chain blockage away from being plunged into catastrophe. This is why I have made a one-time emergency appeal for the $6.6 billion from the billionaires of the world. And is that too much to ask from those who have reaped $1.8 trillion more during the pandemic? The good news is that we have proven systems in place at the World Food Program to feed them all. Last year, we reached 115 million children, women, and men, and we averted famine. Well, the bad news: COVID recycled with devastating ripple effects. We're now over $6 billion short of the funds we need to reach everyone who is knocking on famine's door. We just need the funds to scale up to meet the needs of the people. If you won't help us out of the goodness of your heart and helping your neighbor, loving your neighbor, then do it out of your national security interest or your financial self-interest. Case in point, we can support the hungry, for example, in Syria for less than 50 cents a day. If that same Syrian ends up, let's say, in Germany, the total support cost is over $70 a day. So in Germany in 5 years, $125 billion to support 1 million refugees. $70 a day or 50 cents a day, which makes more sense. If we don't avert famine now, there will be, let me repeat, there will be destabilization of nations and mass migration, and the cost will be 1,000 times more. It was on this platform, hard to believe, 42 years ago, that Mother Teresa said, "The poor are very wonderful people. The poor are very great people. They can teach us so many beautiful things. The poor give us much more than we give them. They're such strong people living day to day with no food. We have much to learn from them." That is why our motivation to help the poor should go much deeper than self-interest. The poor can teach those of us who live in the wealthy world things that we just can't learn any other way. It was a couple of years ago. I was being interviewed in a major television program in the United States, and as we were finishing the program, taking off the microphone, the interviewer looked at me and he said, "Governor, you've got the greatest job on the planet, saving the lives of millions of people every single day." And I looked at him and I said, "I do. I really do. But I'm going to say something to you that you haven't thought of, and it's going to bother you." And he looked at me with a bewildered look, thinking, what could that be? And I said, "I don't go to bed at night thinking about the children we saved. I go to bed at night weeping over the children we could not save. And when we don't have enough money, nor the access we need, we at the World Food Program have to choose which children eat, which children don't eat, which children live, which children die. How would you like that job?" He looked at me with complete horror. "Oh my God, I've never thought about that." And I said, "Well, we have to think about it every day. And you know what really infuriates you? To think that there's $430 trillion of wealth on earth today, and a single child goes to bed hungry and dies? Please, don't ask us to choose who eats, who doesn't eat, who lives, who dies." So let me close with 4 golden rule action steps on how we can love our neighbors. Number 1, leaders of the world in America and China, Russia, India, the Gulf states, the EU, the UK, and everywhere. We need you to assert your powers and stop these horrible wars. Conflict, violence, war cost the global GDP $15 trillion every single year. We could solve every problem on the planet with that money. Number 2, billionaires of the world, give us the $6.6 billion that we need to prevent famine and save 45 million people now. And number 3, and then billionaires, give us your creative genius to reinvent the food security system all over the world. Charity is important, but it will never be enough. You know how to revolutionize phones, cars, rockets, retail. Help us revolutionize how the planet eats. And 4, let's break down all the divisions of the world the old-fashioned way, by sitting down and breaking bread together. If you're black, with a white person. If you're white, with a black person. An Asian, a Latino. If you're rich, with a poor person. If you're liberal, with a conservative. You get my point. That's the very best way to learn how to be equals, to know your neighbor, and to realize how special and how wonderful and how beautiful every single person on the planet is. In the spirit of Alfred Nobel, as inscribed on this medal, Peace and Brotherhood, for the love of the children of the world, let's feed them all. Thank you.
Direktør for Verdens matvareprogram, David Beasley, med klare oppfordringer. Vi gjør oss nå klare for mer musikk her fra Rådhuset i Oslo. Fiolinisten Katarina Schen, som